Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the second of our virtual roundtables. And today we will be talking about strengthening national policymaking for healthier diets and how can businesses and governments work better together. So the rules we have are the same as we had yesterday, but just in case you were not with us yesterday. So you can go to the bottom part of your screen. There is interpretation in English, French, and Spanish. So if you would like to use the interpretation, make sure that you choose your language. But if you want to listen only in English, just make sure that you turn off the interpretation. So in order for getting a mix-up with the interpretation and the sounds coming from different parts, please make sure that when you are, that the original audio is muted so that you can hear a clean interpreting feed only with the language and without the original audio in the background. We will start today with opening remarks. Just before we go into the opening remarks, remember the rules that we usually have around make sure you're muted and you have your video off if you're not taking the floor. And we will be separated into breakout sessions according to your own preference when you registered. And if you didn't express your preference, you will be assigned to one or the other of the breakout sessions. So afterwards, we'll have a Q&A session. And we really expect to hear from you in that Q&A session. And we will open up the chat for this. So please make sure that you use the chat to put in your questions already from now if you have questions, so at any time. And we will choose upon the questions if we have many of them, consolidate them and put them together. So for the breakout sessions, when the time comes, you will be given, you'll be led into the sessions by the moderators of those. Now, we would like to move to the opening remarks. And it would have been Beth Bechtel, the Deputy Director General of FAO. But unfortunately, at the last minute, she was pulled out to another meeting. So she will be joining us in a little while, but she'd asked me to just convey the points that she wanted to make. It's with great pleasure that we are welcoming all of you to the second day of the FAO GAIN virtual roundtables. Everyone around the table, private sector on healthy diets. The discussion yesterday, I thought, was really, really insightful. And I think we really brought in different views of a different variety of actors together. And we, I think, made a contribution towards moving towards this objective. So yesterday, we discussed on business strategies for the delivery of healthy diets for a healthy planet. And I think that we have some further insights in terms of how we're going to address this from the different perspectives of the different actors. But of course, bringing together the dimensions of sustainability, health, nutrition, and affordability is a complex balancing act, and it requires the articulation of all society actors, the governments, the private sector, civil society, farmers, and of course, the focus of our discussion, the SMEs. And how do the SMEs, with all the challenges that they're facing, and we identified several yesterday, how are they going to make sure that they are able to, A, survive within this COVID situation, but also contribute to healthy diets? So we heard yesterday from the different actors that I cited, We also heard from large multinational and national businesses and their associations about some of the incentives that they have developed to make healthy and nutritious food more accessible, as well as how they are supporting smaller businesses through business-to-business collaborations and new ways of engagement. And one of our breakout sessions discussed quite a bit on this point, the importance of cooperation, collaboration, rather than competition, which is, we believe, a very important point. And hence, the need to build trust, which is a central element of all of this equation. So how is this trust going to be built? Well, alignment of purpose, direction, and mission, lots of more dialogue, lots of more understanding, and also ensuring that these pre-competitive spaces are very much reinforced. We also heard firsthand about some challenges faced, particularly by farmers and micro, small, and medium enterprises, the focus of our discussion, to invest and operate effectively to supply healthy foods. So the other breakout session discussed very much the need for support services to strengthen the capacities of the SMEs. And they identified two key areas, which are around specifically knowledge sharing and finance. In terms of the whole discussion and our focus on SMEs, we identified priority areas to improve their own sustainability and impact on diets. And of course, finance, technical assistance, technology, enabling policy environment, and we hope to get into that more today. Also, very importantly, internal capacities of the SMEs. So we heard that many of the SMEs don't feel that they have not only the knowledge around healthy diets, and this would be new to many of them, but also very importantly, the capacities to come together, to organize, to support each other. We're talking about supporting each other, collaboration, trust, obviously, but there's capacities that need to be strengthened in terms of organizing, and very specifically, organizing in order to create a policy voice that could be heard by governments. So to get to scale, there's a number of challenges, and we noted some areas that where the business setting within which the SMEs and the farmers operate can be addressed. And so one is a better articulated government policies considering cross-sectoral aspects. And in particular, the idea of food policy was discussed, as many countries, I would say probably most countries, don't have a food policy, or also don't have the internal structure which is necessary to produce food policy. Second, tackling and radically improving SMEs' access to finance. So new facilities for finance for SMEs, getting them investment ready, and then ensuring that they're able to meet that readiness. Third, consumers. Of course, consumers are a fundamental part of this whole equation. It is consumers who will ultimately influence supply through their choices. So what can we do to create strong consumer demand for healthy diets to be produced, and then to be consumed, and then to be produced sustainably? So we discussed the possibility of having big consumer demand campaigns and other actions. Fourthly, investor coalitions that change investment priorities and incentivize companies to produce healthier foods. We also spoke about civil society and the fundamental role of civil society to play in stepping up as a change agent and moving the agenda towards producing and consuming healthy diets that take the planet into account. And we know that we wouldn't be today in the discussions on the environment where we are if civil society hadn't ensured that this was very high up on the agenda. Finally, parliamentarians. We didn't talk about parliamentarians yesterday, but parliamentarians are fundamental in creating the enabling environment, and specifically the legal environment. The legal basis on which many of these actions are going to rest on. And during COVID, it's interesting to see how the parliamentary fronts against hunger that have been supported by FAO in Latin America and now worldwide have produced quite a bit of legislation to address COVID-related issues. And just very recently, Ecuador passed its first law on school feeding virtually due to COVID. That's the first one. So, building on all of these discussions, today's theme is about strengthening national policymaking for healthier diets. And the discussion will be centered around how business and governments can work better together to deliver healthy diets. So we know that more than ever, there's a need for governments and businesses to work together for lasting, effective solutions. But we also know that there's levels of government. Today we're looking at national governments, but of course the local governments are also important. And we know in this COVID crisis that many times there's a clash between the national governments and the local governments. So the role of governments in creating an enabling environment for businesses to invest and operate, and for them to consequently contribute to the food system's transformation. Importance of public-private collaborations and partnerships is more fundamental today than ever, and it's recognized within the SDG agenda. So I am sure that today's discussions are going to be able to highlight the challenges that we have in terms of having this much better collaboration between businesses and governments, but also we'll hopefully also identify many of the opportunities. So I look forward to the proposals for innovative solutions going forward. Now, I step into my other role because this is the opening remarks that our Deputy Director General Beth Bechtel would have given. And now it's my pleasure to hand over the floor to Lawrence for his opening remarks. Lawrence Haddad.
Thank you, Marcella, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And Marcella's done a fantastic job of summarizing yesterday's very rich discussion and then framing today's session really well. So I won't add too much to what she's said, but today is effectively about, yesterday businesses were telling us what their aspirations were, what they felt their responsibilities were, what they thought they could do, and also some of the challenges they face in doing that. And towards the end of yesterday, we got into, well, what can the rest of us do, the other stakeholders do, to spur them on to even greater ambition, hold them to account when they do things that are not good for nutrition, and just essentially make it easier for them to do the right thing for nutrition. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, really the enabling environment. And we're going to talk a lot about what governments can do, and Marcella's quite right, it's national, local, municipal governments, and also what's the role of consumers, consumer associations, consumer campaigns. Two things I want to just throw into the mix that I'm personally curious about. One is, do we really need a national food system action plan? Do countries need that to organize all the complex bits, all the different sectors, the different ministries, the different stakeholders, or is that just bureaucratic waste of time to do that? And I have days when I think it's definitely the former, and days when I think, well, maybe we don't need it so much. So I think, like most things, it's how you do it and who does it. So I'd be really interested I'll be listening out for that. How systematic, how planned do we want to be in terms of having a food system action plan at the national level? The only one I know of is Norway. I don't know of any other country that has one. And the second thing I'll be looking out for and listening out for is the role of metrics. We'll be talking about enabling environment, but how do we measure whether an environment is enabling for businesses to do more for nutritious and safe food? Again, we're doing something with Third Way Africa, which is called EBANI, E-B-A-N-I, the Enabling Business to Advance Nutrition Index. And it's a bit like the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index, but geared towards nutrition. How how enabling is the environment for businesses? Can we put some metrics on that? And some of the initial findings are that we can. So I'd be really interested in those two things: plans, national plans, subnational plans for food systems, and metrics around what the enabling environment looks like. With that, I pass it back to you, Marcella, for a fabulous introduction, and I'm sure will be fabulous facilitation. Thank you.
Sorry, unmute. So thank you so much, Lawrence. Indeed, very important points, and also very important towards our discussion on food systems and Food Systems Summit next year. So thank you very much for your remarks. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Ana Larti, who is the Director of the Food and Nutrition Division at FAO. And she will be moderating the panel. Ana, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Marcella. Thank you, Lawrence, for the introduction. Indeed, this session, we are going to be talking about how can businesses and governments work together to make healthier diets affordable. I think that we have lined up for you 4 very experienced, knowledgeable personalities to take us through this discussion. Let me go straight to their background and then we go into the discussion. Our first presenter will be Sharon Bly. She is the Director, Health and Wellness Pillar at the Consumer Goods Forum and is responsible for driving the health and wellness agenda of the leading global platform for the consumer goods industry. She works towards empowering consumers to make the right decisions and help them to adopt healthier lifestyles. The Consumer Goods Forum is a CEO-led organization that helps the world's retailers and consumer goods manufacturers to collaborate alongside other key stakeholders to secure consumer trust and drive positive change, including greater efficiency. Our second speaker would be Senator Mauritius Proano. He is an agricultural engineer and a professor at the Central University of Ecuador. He served as an assemblyman and the vice president of the Permanent Specialized Commission on Food Sovereignty and Development of the Agriculture and Fishing Sector. He was re-elected in 2017 for a second 4-year term. He has been the Vice Minister of Agriculture and Livestock under Secretary of Agriculture Development, Advisor to the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock, and General Coordinator of Innovation. He has written several books and articles on pre-legislative consultation, natural resources, watershed management, agriculture, and water. Then our other speaker would also be Camilla Coverland. She is a surgeon, a master's in public health and a PhD in nutrition. She directs the work of the Center for Research and Food Environments and the prevention of chronic diseases associated with nutrition. Her research group is dedicated to population study of the early nutritional determinants of obesity and associated diseases, particularly metabolic diseases and breast cancer. Her research group is part of the international network called Informas for monitoring food environments. And they also carry out descriptive population studies and evaluation of public policies such as the Chilean Labeling Law. Then our final speaker will be Francis Abibi. He is the chief economist of the Ugandan Development Bank. He guides the bank's investments and development sector intervention strategies, develops products, concepts, policies, reviews investment project viability, and guides the overall strategy of the bank. The UDB is a development finance institution financing projects in different sectors of the economy with the largest portfolio in agricultural value chain development. So these are the background of the 4 really distinguished personalities we have. And I'm going to start immediately our discussion with Sharon. Sharon, the SOFI 2020, which is put out by FAO and other UN colleagues, reports that globally, 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. What can governments and private sector do to make healthy diets affordable to all? Is there any role for the consumer in this? And especially, how do you see your organization advocating for healthier and affordable baskets and scaling this up? Sharon, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you, Marcella and Lawrence, and hello, everyone. So, Anna, I will share 3 ideas for collaboration. They're not exhaustive, but 3 areas where I think we can really drive things forward. So the first one is around welcoming legislation. And contrary to some of the beliefs, I think the private sector does welcome legislation. We have concrete examples of the Consumer Goods Forum where we do this on food safety policy, on food waste, and it's not necessarily as developed in the whole area of healthier lives. And I think if we all want to really reach that systemic change that's necessary in the diets, this is something that, to create those PPPs is really necessary, and to co-create at that pace of change that's needed between private sector and government. I would really call for this and welcome legislation when it is the right one. And 2 examples that came to mind they're both from the UK actually, where we've seen this has worked and where we could have had opportunity to do it. So for example, it was on the tax that was introduced on sugared beverages. It was co-developed between private sector and government. The reformulation happened. The price was not passed on to the consumer, and consumption dropped of those beverages. And there has been, I would say, it was something that was welcomed by both government and both the private sector as a model for collaboration, and something that we can do in this space. Another thing just recently that happened with COVID-19, which was mentioned earlier on, was in terms of school children and not having access to healthy meals in school, with them being closed down. We came together with our retailing community and got behind the government Healthy School Meal Voucher campaign, really making sure that the families that had those vouchers, the awareness was there. They understood how they could use their 15 pounds to feed the family during lunchtime and at dinner time, and what those healthier choices could have been. And I think we probably could have gone faster and had a better impact if we co-coordinated those efforts with between private sector and government. The second area where I think I would call for collaboration, again, was mentioned in yesterday's dialogues, was the whole area about creating consumer demand. I would say from a private sector standpoint, the best business case always stands with the consumer at the center of it. And we work very much around the barriers to accessing healthier diets. And no matter where you are in the world, the first one that comes back is it's too expensive. And then others, it's not as tasty or it's not as filling. So when you have budgetary restrictions, and those are the barriers, you're not going to make those changes to try something new with those 3 barriers that are in place. And even though we've done a number of studies and research with Nielsen and other consumer organizations, and even when you have the desire from consumers to live a healthier lifestyle, the percentage of those who are actually achieving this or getting past those barriers, that changeover isn't very high. So there's definitely something that we can do in that space around creating consumer demand. And then the last piece, I would say, where we're heavily doing work at the Consumer Goods Forum is all around behavior change, understanding data, and the metrics that Lawrence mentioned. So this focus on shifting consumer behaviors and using the levers that the private sector has around access, around affordability, around convenience, and in particular reaching the most vulnerable. And I think during COVID, it's put a spotlight on many things, including health inequalities and financial inequalities, and the correlation between the 2 of these. And what we really want to do is in a number of projects that we have around the world, in 14 different countries, called Collaboration for Healthier Lives, the data and the learnings that we have on how the private sector can nudge people towards these healthier choices. We want to share that data and share those learnings with authorities who are making decisions to make systemic change. So I thought I'd just share three short examples from projects that I have on the ground, grassroots projects. Health is very local, even if you want to make this, this nationwide change, it is very, very local. So example, in the UK, we talk about affordability, value, price, and we've seen some of the interventions that we've tried in supermarkets. You'll get about 80% of consumers or shoppers who will make that change. And then what we've seen is that if you have the right value points and you continue in terms of communication and education, about half of those shoppers will keep that change on a sustainable manner. So we've seen that we can find ways to really make that impact and that consumption pattern change on a sustainable basis. And then we've tried other types of interventions around, you could call them swaps. So actually completely switching out the higher calorie option for a better alternative and making a complete switch. So actually consumers don't have to make that decision. The industry has taken that responsibility, and there isn't necessarily any impact on consumption, and people are just consuming better. The second example is from Turkey, where we work together with the local team on the Ministry of Health, and we've actually developed a balanced nutrition index. And again, as part of that index, we're using access and affordability as two levers that the industry, retailers and manufacturers can do together. We looked at what a nutritious basket could be and how we could move the dial on the different categories to progress a health score of the basket. And now we've worked with local academics, and the results and the methodology of how we've done that, we're going to publish it on the first week of September. So I'd be thrilled to share that with everyone on this call. And it's something that, even though health is local, I do think that we've tried to do it, although it's not perfect. It is a methodology that could be adapted to different markets and different private sectors around the world. And the proof points that we have there is 52% of consumers in that market have stuck to that change, with, of course, using price and value as one of those key levers to have that change happen. And then finally, something that's really important, of course, is the digital world and the new way that people are consuming. And again, this is accelerated through COVID, and in particular, certain population types and clusters of people who weren't necessarily in the online environment. We worked with the Chinese Nutrition Society to try to create an online reference for what good nutrition looks like when there isn't necessarily a standard in place. And we created a healthy shelf in an online environment, and we're working with global platforms, platforms, nationwide platforms in China, such as Alibaba and others, to see how we can really integrate that and move the needle in terms of online shopping. And again, price and value plays a really integral role in moving that forward. So those would be welcoming legislation, creating that consumer demand, seeing how we can nudge consumption patterns, and then sharing the learnings and the data and the metrics on how we're trying to do that.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharon, for sharing this, and especially for summarizing the last part. I think your presentation clearly tells us with these concrete examples that good collaboration between businesses and government is possible to actually help the consumer. And I like the part where you say you made these changes without passing on the cost to the consumer. That's what we want. Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll now go on to the second speaker, who would be Senator Mauritius Proanyu. Senator, my question to you: what can policymakers and governments do to facilitate the production, processing, and sale of nutritious foods by SMEs? What are the specific examples of market linkages with SMEs and the enabling factors for this? Senator, the floor is yours.
Bueno, muchas gracias a FAO y GAIN por la invitación a participar en este importante evento dentro de esta mesa redonda virtual. La pregunta que me corresponde es cómo utilizar eficazmente las políticas y los programas gubernamentales para impactar a diferentes grupos objetivos y tener un efecto indirecto, ¿no? Incluido la creación de demandas y los vínculos con el mercado. Hoy cambia el paradigma del desarrollo en temas como la soberanía y seguridad alimentaria, debido a las secuelas que deja la pandemia del COVID-19 en el mundo. Las enseñanzas parten de los siguientes puntos. Uno, primero, se demuestra que la agricultura campesina es más estable y sostenible que otro tipo de agricultura. Segundo, se posesiona fuertemente el concepto de soberanía alimentaria sobre el concepto de libre mercado. Tres, se muestra que si hubiera existido el apoyo en inversión, en lo técnico, en lo financiero, en lo logístico para la agricultura familiar y pymes, el abastecimiento y distribución de alimentos hubiera facilitado la entrega de alimentos frescos, complementando las dietas alimenticias en la época de pandemia. En los últimos años, Ecuador ha reducido significativamente la tasa de desnutrición crónica. Sin embargo, esta sigue siendo elevada en niños menores de 5 años, un 23.9%. Para la alimentación escolar en Ecuador existe un mecanismo, ¿no?, de compras públicas denominado subastas inversas corporativa de alimentación escolar, en la cual se identifica el proveedor que se encargará de la provisión de alimentos escolar. Pero el acceso está dominado por empresas que tienen un gran poder económico, infraestructura y logística, que son las que logran contratarse. Todo el presupuesto para la adquisición de los alimentos se dirige a pocas empresas y en su mayor parte están ubicados en centros urbanos, donde pagan ahí sus impuestos, activan el transporte, generan empleo y sus utilidades se concentran en sus accionistas y propietarios. Entonces es necesario un nuevo modelo para la alimentación saludable, no solo pensando en un enfoque de reducir los niveles de malnutrición con la entrega de alimentos o restricción de otros, sino que debe impulsar al mismo tiempo el desarrollo local, ampliando su objetivo hacia el incremento del ingreso de las familias campesinas, aumento del consumo de alimentos locales, inducir en la educación nutricional de los niños, niñas y adolescentes para que sean el vehículo de cambio de hábitos de consumo actual a las dietas saludables en sus hogares. En Ecuador acabamos de aprobar la Ley Orgánica de Alimentación Escolar. Esta normativa tiene el objetivo de iniciar un nuevo modelo de alimentación saludable con un enfoque más amplio, el activar la agricultura familiar y asegurar que el presupuesto para alimentación escolar en las compras públicas sea mínimo, en un mínimo de un 35%. Es decir, pasar de una política de gobierno de turno hacia una política de Estado. Crear una trilogía entre la educación, salud y agricultura que sea fuerte y cumpla con la inclusión de alimentos saludables en escuelas y colegios y luego empujar propuestas locales de producción saludables hacia la agregación de valor de los alimentos. ¿Cómo hacer esto? En Ecuador tenemos más de 20.000 establecimientos educacionales y cerca de 4 millones de estudiantes, niños, niñas y adolescentes, más de 3.000 establecimientos de salud públicos y unas 2.500 organizaciones campesinas en el agroecuatoriano dispuestas a producir los alimentos. El presupuesto se ha incrementado y sobrepasa los 120 millones de dólares. Entonces, existe la demanda para la alimentación escolar por parte del Estado. Además, se tienen las normas nutricionales y sus requerimientos de inocuidad, calidad por parte de la autoridad de salud. Esto determina las características claves que debe cumplir una oferta local. Lo que hace falta es de estructurar la oferta. Esta sería más fácil porque conocemos los volúmenes de alimentos que se necesita, la cantidad de inocuidad de alimentos requeridos y el presupuesto anual para la alimentación escolar. Siendo este es el momento más importante de la integración, donde entra la oferta de alimentos de la agricultura familiar y los pymes con las reglas de juego claras y un presupuesto programado por el Estado. Entonces, ¿qué necesita la agricultura familiar y las pymes para lograr cubrir la demanda de alimentos y dietas saludables? Bueno, primero un precio estable en el mercado de alimentos, que se puede lograr si el Estado compra dentro de las compras públicas con precios a futuro. Esto además de apoyar a planificar la producción agropecuaria local. Se puede ajustar a la demanda de alimentos saludables. Además, estimula para avanzar hacia procesos de agregación de valor de alimentos locales y así como la creación o fortalecimiento de los pymes. Además, procesos de innovación tecnológica participativa por parte del Estado o ONGs, a nivel de finca u organización campesina para, en conjunto, innovar la producción de alimentos saludables locales y cumplir con la oferta estatal, e impulsar las pymes para agregación de valor de su producción con capacitación y mejoramiento de sus destrezas y habilidades. Inversión en el sector público, en investigación y desarrollo de nuevas tecnologías para pymes, para ingredientes más saludables y la reformulación de productos. Ampliar la cobertura del crédito y seguro agrícola para la agricultura familiar y pymes que abastecen a los programas de alimentación local, para disminuir la incertidumbre de la producción agropecuaria y motivar el mejoramiento tecnológico de una producción de alimentos saludables. Si aprendemos, compartimos y tenemos el compromiso de luchar contra el hambre, entonces debemos lograr pasar de alimentos saludables a dietas saludables y llegar a poblaciones saludables y así aportar al desarrollo local. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, Senator, for your intervention and for giving us the example of what's going on in Ecuador, linking school feeding, SMEs, family farming. This is indeed a very, very good collaboration. It's actually the win-win-win that we want to talk about. And I'm very happy to hear that you have actually brought and emphasized some of the issues that came out yesterday about how SMEs can be supported, how family farmers can be supported, the issue about stable prices, you know, the issue about strengthening SMEs, issue about investment in public sector, credit facilities for both SMEs and family farming. These came out yesterday, and you have actually emphasized and brought it out in the discussion for the situation in Ecuador. Thank you very much for your intervention. Thank you so much. Now we will go to the next one. Camilla will talk to us about the very well-known Chilean Labeling Law. Camilla, my question to you. The Chilean Labeling Law is an example of how national policies can have an impact on businesses to change their business models and to offer healthier options for consumers. What impact has the labeling law had on the private sector and business models regarding healthy diets? And what has been the key opportunities and challenges, and what lessons can be learned and shared with SMEs? So Camilla, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, Anna. Hello, Marcella and Lawrence. Thanks for the invitation of being here. I would like to take the opportunity to start very briefly addressing one of the questions that Lawrence posed at the beginning of this session regarding whether we need a national food policy. Because I think that the Chile example can help or provide some evidence on that regard. Chile is a South American country that has one of the highest obesity rates and one of the worst, I think, diets worldwide. And over the past 30 years, different initiatives have been implemented by different sectors in the government. However, they were non-coordinated and they were addressing particular pieces of the problem. And really, we were not observing any change at all. So really from the parliament, there was an initiative of trying to coordinate at least a piece of those actions. And the result of that effort, it's really this labeling law. This is a law that really incorporates three big aspects. One is the use of a warning label in the front of package. Second, a very massive restriction of marketing of unhealthy foods to children. And thirdly, the protection of what happens on the schools and the nursery schools by avoiding the selling and promotion of unhealthy foods. And of course, this is not an example of a national food policy, But what we have observed is that this has had very positive results in terms of what happens on the food environment and with the consumer behavior. So answering to Lawrence, I really believe that the way to go is really move forward in terms of trying to really coordinate actions at a very high level and try to create very cohesive policies and messages that will be building this enabling environment for healthy and sustainable diets. Okay, but the issue here was that there were some concerns on how this regulatory policy have had some impact on industry, and we have been working in trying to address that concern on the past few months with a set of colleagues. Really what I can say is that there were very positive changes after the implementation of the labeling and marketing law in Chile. First, we have analyzed through different media outlets, TV, radio, newspapers, how the attitudes of the private sector have been changing after the implementation of the law. And what we have observed is that we move from a very negative position to a more positive views. We have observed that the negative opinions towards the law have almost disappeared after implementation. And actually, several companies are seeing the law as an opportunity for innovation, for expanding their portfolio of products and really trying or rethinking about what a healthy diets should look for consumers. Moreover, we have observed that a few companies have taken the opportunity of using the absence of these warning labels in the packages as a marketing strategy of their companies, and really using this as an advantage and use this to differentiate their products from those of similar companies in their food categories. Secondly, we have analyzed the nutrient content of packaged foods on the food supply. This is an analysis covering more than 1,500 packaged products before and after the law. And what we are observing is an important decrease on some critical nutrients, particularly sugar and sodium, on the packaged food supply. This is driven mainly by decreases on sweet beverages, dairy products, and breakfast cereals in the case of sugar. And in the case of sodium, is mostly driven by decreases in cheese and processed meats. And finally, we have used data from the Internal Revenue Service. This is very detailed data with respect to employment and salaries from different sectors in Chile. And some colleagues from the economy department have been able to analyze a series of data from before the regulation to after the regulation. And they have observed that on average, there is no change on employments on the food sector compared to other sectors of the economy. And also they have observed no change on the mean salaries of employees of those companies. So basically what they suggest is that it might be that some companies experience some decreases on production of some food products, but they were able to compensate with other products within their same portfolio. or they were able to reformulate their products, but in the end, the average effect is no. So in summary, what we believe the Chilean cases is showing is that there is an opportunity of really adapting to these national regulations. We think that the message for companies of countries that are discussing similar policies to the one implemented in Chile is that they shouldn't fear so much what will happen, because this data indicates that there is a space for reformulating, for being more propositive about this type of regulation. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you very much, Camilla. This is very, very interesting. We see the case of Chile, where government took the lead to really change things, and then initially negative reaction, but then business saw that, hey, there are opportunities here, and they came on board with you. And you have even gone further to do analysis. These are areas that businesses were concerned about: loss of jobs, loss of income for people and all. And you have shown that this is not the case. I like the end, what you said, that they should not be afraid. They should not fear about the law, because it's actually good. So, and as business has bounced back, they are now seeing opportunities in this law, to actually put innovation into their work. Thank you very much. This is quite a unique situation also. Thank you. Now, I'd like to go to our next speaker, Francis Abibi. I know he was having problems joining us. I hope he's been able to connect now. Francis, he is the chief economist with the Ugandan National Bank, and he's going to talk to us. Francis, your question is, how can private sector finance public revenues be better mobilized to contribute to government's financial gap? What are the innovations required to pay attention to the smallholders and SMEs, and especially those producing nutritious foods? So Francis, if you are with us, please, the floor is yours. Hello? Is Francis with us? Hello? Okay. Okay. If not, we can come back to Francis. We can come back to Francis. I have one. I want to use this opportunity whilst we hope that Francis will join us. I'd like to give the floor to Carol Collins. Carol Collins is the Deputy Director on the Strategic Program 1 in FAO. And I would like him to just talk briefly tell us about how you think the food, how the first officers in the countries, are actually creating the necessary enabling environment for healthy diets. Just briefly talk to us whilst we hope that Francis will join us. So Carol Collins, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, I can hear you very well, and I'm sure the others can, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm the manager of the first program, which is a joint initiative between FAO and the European Union. First is a policy assistance facility that has been working in over 35 countries over the last 5 years around policy support in support of food systems transformation. So we are attached basically to investments being made by the EU in food systems transformation in all these countries. And our policy officers have been active in a number of domains, including in bringing the different government stakeholders together, but also working with private sector and other organizations around the question of how can we make food systems more responsive to the food security and nutrition needs, but also the sustainability requirements that are out there. And I actually had a question for all the panelists, and that relates to the true cost of food, because I think a lot of the debate around the private sector, of course, is centered around costs and who covers the costs. Now, what's the true cost of food? The cost of ill health, poverty, environmental degradation. And so the question is, where do these costs occur, and who covers at the end of the day these costs? Because that is often not the same stakeholders who cover this cost. And so one of the things we've been engaging in recently is a partnership with Food Civility, which is an initiative of the University of Oxford Environmental Change Institute, around trying to generate data around the true cost of food and bring that into the debate at national level. I think that's a very big gap in the policy debate, the data on the true cost of food. But the second big part that we've learned from our experience in the field is actually the fact that the political playing field around this question is not level. It's actually tilted very much against the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. I think it's much easier for large-scale businesses, international corporations, to engage around this domain. But for the small players, it's very difficult from two perspectives. One, how to engage with the government sector and the larger players in a way that is fair and equitable. And secondly, also in terms of actually adopting practices that would increase the sustainability from environmental, social, and economic perspective. Small and medium-sized enterprises do not have the kind of capacity to carry risk or take risk as the large players do. So my question is really, so what are the experiences from these different countries that we're hearing from in leveling the playing field and bringing in data into the debate, data which is really badly needed. So thank you, Anna. Over to you.
I'm muted. Okay. Thank you very much, Carol, for being brief and highlighting what you just did. I'll now go back to Francis. Francis, if you can hear me, please take the floor and make your intervention. I can see him, but Francis, you're muted. I can see you. Please, can you unmute yourself? Okay, well, we will move on. I would like to move on to the question and answer time. Hopefully, Francis will have the opportunity of taking the floor at some point. You have all heard from our distinguished speakers. I will not attempt to summarize what they have said. I'm looking at some of the questions there that has come, and I'm hoping that you will take some of these. One of the questions that came up is about a private sector at the policy table. The question being asked is, how do you manage conflict of interest? How do you manage conflict of interest with private sector at the policy table? We all know what has happened in time past, lobbying and all, so I'm putting this on the table. Any of my persons can take this up. I see again Francis has come. Francis, would you like to take the floor now, if you can unmute yourself? Please, can you unmute him? Okay.
Yes.
We will just take, okay.
Can you hear me?
Francis. Yes, I can. Now I can. Very well, okay. Francis. Yes.
Okay. Press here. Yeah. Continue. Okay. Sorry for coming late. I think I had some problem with my network, but better late than never. Are we together?
Yes, we are. Please go on.
Okay. So in Uganda, we have quite a big percentage of SMEs and small businesses, small farmers, smallholder farmers, and small and medium-sized businesses. In fact, it forms about, in terms of gross domestic product, it forms about 92%, about 90% of the GDP of the country. And in terms of smallholder farmers, it's about 92% of the size of farmers we have in the country. So it's really a very significant proportion of the group which we need to really target and get a way of financing them. But at the same time, they are very risky. The challenge in mobilizing resources to support this group is that they are very risky in terms of they don't have accurate records which they keep for their businesses, which makes it very risky for financiers, both private sector and even quasi-public sector to support them, because there's lack of information. If any bank is to support them or any financier is to support them, it means the fund will be at a very expensive rate because this increases their risk profile. They also lack collaterals. So it makes it very difficult to mobilize funding for them because they don't have collaterals which are needed by financiers as a backup for the funds they give to them. The management skill is even lacking. So that means that businesses are not really, the continuity is a problem. You find most of them, if you are not supported in terms of capacity building, they die within the 2 years from the date they start. So it's really a risky segment of the economy. But how do we help to mobilize resources so that we can challenge these resources to this sector? As a Uganda Development Bank, we have played some big role in doing this. One, to reduce the risk. When we are supporting them, we look at the whole value chain. We look at the whole value chain. If it is a smallholder farmer, we look at it from the time of opening the land to the time when the product is ready and ready for the market. In other words, we look at the whole value chain from opening the land, plowing the land, planting, harvesting, storage, up to the point of marketing, or even if it's for processing up to the point where they are processing to finished products. So you need to look at the whole value chain. And if you look at the whole value chain, you need to get a way of supporting each and every person in the value chain. Because let's say if you support only the farmers, then there is going to be a problem with marketing and storage. So you need to look at also the stage of marketing and storage, and you also support that person. So what we do, we support this group in the whole value chain so that if the farmers are ready with the product and they don't have the storage facility, then somebody who has a storage facility who is nearby, we support him, also we finance him, so that the value chain continues up to the point where the commodity reaches the market. And in doing that, you also maintain quality, because if storage is a problem and farmers cannot store it, then you need to take it to somebody who can store it better and you finance that person. Now, if that person needs to sell it to the processor, you also need to support the processor and he processes the product. If somebody who buys the final product and takes to the market, you also need to support that. By doing that, you avoid the risks associated with any part of the value chain. And by doing that, you motivate people to bring in finances. That is one way we have helped to mobilize resources for this segment of the economy. Then what we have also done is to look at the guarantee. Because of the high risk profile and the informal sector, most of them are also informal in their way of operation. So because of the high risk profile and the informal nature of this group of businesses, what we have done is to arrange for guarantees. In other words, a risk sharing arrangement where we may say as a bank, let's guarantee 50% of the fund which is being channeled to this sector. If a commercial bank, let's say, want to support a smallholder farmer or an SME, we say, let's guarantee 50% of the loan you are giving to them. That first of all brings the cost of finance down. Then secondly, you have reduced the risk which would scare away the private financer or any equity investor who wants to support this group of people. So by providing that guarantee, you bring into play a risk-sharing arrangement where risk is distributed and everybody takes a smaller portion of the risk. So there by doing that, you help to mobilize resources to go into these sectors. Another thing we do is in terms of insurance, we have an agricultural insurance scheme where we insure against certain risks which are very, very prominent in this area and which always scare away people who finances go into this area. So we have helped to mobilize resources through insurance scheme where people put in their money, and if they fail to get back, is insured, and we try to get that money back. The investor gets that money back from the insurance, certain percentage of that money. Now, in addition to that, you need also to help in building capacity. We have a unit in the bank called Advisory Services, where we look at the challenges which these people have. We really help to address these challenges, so that they become, their business become less risky. So if the businesses are less risky, then financiers are attracted to these businesses. So by doing capacity building in terms of advisory services, you identify the challenges they have, if it is bookkeeping, if it is accounting, if it is product development, if it is marketing, if it is managerial problem, you identify those problems, you get a way of sorting out those problems. We do it directly, or we even outsource some of the people who are competent to do that, and we support them financially. Until these people are ready, then we really give them money. Then another model we use is, we use what we call the group funding, because they are many and scattered and informal. They lack managerial capacity. They lack the coming together. They are very risky. Some of them don't even have collateral. So what we do is to organize them into groups who are producing similar products. Now, by doing that, even if they don't have security, we make sure that they have a group management structure, those who oversee what they're doing, and those they have confidence on. So we mobilize them under a group structure with some good management, and we build the capacity of the management and the group members. Then after doing that, they provide what we call cross guarantees. In other words, each member of the group guarantees the other. If he sees one misbehaving, they try to discipline that person, so that by doing that, you don't even need this. You don't even need this conventional security needed by banks, because they watch each other, they monitor each other, and there's group management which checks on what they're doing. So you make sure that they really do what the money which has been advanced to them is supposed to do. And by doing that, we have money to get this money back, and we have also mobilized other finances to come in, because it is now easier to monitor them, because they are under a group. The administrative cost of managing the loan becomes less, because you do it through the group management together. The collateral now becomes a cross guarantee. They don't have assets, they don't have all these things they can provide as collateral, but the cross guarantee each other becomes a very important asset. And by doing that, we have really helped to mobilize funding, both from private sector and also from other financiers, and they're attracted when they see this happening. So basically, that is what we have done as far as these small groups and SMEs are concerned. Now, in terms of innovation, we have looked at certain areas. One of the areas we have looked at is blended financing. We have tried to deploy a combination of credit and maybe grant support or technical support fund, which is directed towards certain things that build their capacity, and you support it with a loan. By doing that, the effective cost of the loan becomes lower, and this makes it affordable. Secondly, we have also come up with some model where we give those smallholders, and especially in agriculture and SMEs, facilities at a slightly lower rate, so that they can do what they're able to do. And by doing that, gradually we try to reclassify them. Those who have improved, you bring them up, and you may take it to the formal lending structure. Those who are still struggling, you build capacity, and you progressively build them up. Then second, so blended finance is one option. Then the other one is this area of digitalization. You know, the cost of managing facilities which are given to these people, because they are small and they are quite many, the administrative cost of these finances becomes very high if you deal with them one by one. So what we are now trying to do to develop is what we call digitalization. The payment you make through the digital system, and even information which they want, you send them through the digital system. And by doing that, you reduce the cost of administration. And you also build their capacity at the same time. And you also increase the access to finance, the outreach, the number of people who can have access to finance. So that has also supported the financing of this group, and it has attracted some financiers in terms of supporting what we are doing, or even using the same system to intervene in these areas. Then finally, there's this bigger problem of structuring. These people are small, and they are many, and they are so informal. So when you are supporting them, you need to have an appropriate structure of financing that also tries to reduce the risk. So the risk elements should be built in the financial structure you are going to adopt. So briefly, in summary, that is what I can share with you. Thank you.
Much, Francis. I mean, you can see a lot of experience behind this. You have actually highlighted a lot of the problems that came up, issues about financing, technical know-how, and this has all come out. And I really like, in terms of what you are doing, knowing all these challenges, what can be done, looking at a whole value approach, providing guarantees, because no doubt it's a high risk group because of all the issues you have mentioned, you know, and you have even gone further to look at effective supervision, guaranteeing them, distributing the risk. I think there's a lot that can be learned here regarding what can be done to actually support SMEs. Thank you so much for sharing these with us. I'm looking at the chat box. There are a lot of interesting questions coming out. I'll first give the floor to Chris Hegedon of CFS. I see his hand up, but I also like to put a few people on the floor. I see Professor Swinburne trying to raise issue about conflict of interest. I'll give him the floor to say something after Chris. And also if Nora has a very interesting question. Nora, if you would like to take the floor, I will also give you the opportunity. So let's start with Chris. Chris, please.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anna. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, first of all, kudos to you and to GAIN for the event. Very interesting discussions and great panel. Look, as Secretary of the Committee on World Food Security, we are your close partner and partners to many of you on this call. So we hope you will join us at our special event in October and recognize that we are working on voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition specifically, as well as policy recommendations around innovations, agroecological and others. So these are very much a part of this conversation. I asked Francis in the chat box, because I didn't hear him use the word nutrition. Maybe he said a lot in a short amount of time, but in this financing space, it seems to be the focus is still on production increases, the number of calories, increasing the value chains, but I didn't hear the word nutrition and any specific targets in his brief. I also commented on the ideal situation to Lawrence's comments and question earlier about national policymaking. You know, the CFS is only as good as the voluntary nature of governments taking our products and using them in their domestic settings. What would be the ideal outcome if I could have any wish granted? I would say we'd have 195 committees on world food security or national committees on food security. So I asked Camilla in Chile and Senator Proaño in Ecuador, why don't you have a national, a Chilean Committee on World Food Security, Committee on Food Security, or an Ecuadorian Committee on Food Security that brings in, like we do, the private sector, the civil society, and other key actors in the food security and food nutrition equation. Thank you, Anna, and good luck for the rest of the program.
Okay, thank you. I'll probably just give the floor to one other person looking at the time. Prof. Swinburne want to take the floor, and Nora?
Thank you very much indeed. Anna, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, very well.
Okay, thanks. Listen, I think the presentation by Camilla about what's happened in Chile is a very good example of government leadership, and that took a lot of government leadership of Senator over a long period of time to get that, and then the industry has responded to those new set of conditions. I think if they tried to do that through some kind of public-private partnership, they would not have got nearly where they, as far as they have. And I do think that government, we do need the leadership from government, and the history of trying to do things collectively when there's so much commercial conflicts of interest is very fraught. So yeah, I like the Chilean model, I have to say.
Okay, thank you very much. I see somebody has responded also to this conflict of interest. The person said conflict of interest should not be a problem. We have to work on trust. Transparency of all parties is key. So, I mean, we cannot really solve the issue. Government and private sector have to work together. And Nora, would you want to take the floor for just 30 minutes, 30-second intervention, and then I'll go back to the panel for their summary. Each person just a summary, 30-second summary. But Nora, I'd like to give you the floor. Okay, if she's not, will else want to take the floor? You are talking about that conflict of interest should certainly not be ignored, but if we can change the system, do you want to take the floor? Else De Bruin?
Okay, thank you, Anna. I'm Els de Groene from Unilever, and yeah,
you have 30 seconds, please. So be brief.
Yes, very brief. No, I think there are countries where a collaborative approach is working very well. So by default, saying private sector should not be at the table is, in my view, not the solution, because if you want to change the system, you need to have a collaborative way of working with all the actors in it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your intervention. Now I would like to go back to my presenters. Please give me just a few seconds, take home notes you want people to leave from here with. Should I start with Sharon? Sharon, please, just a few seconds. What is your take home message?
So 3 things again. Business wants to flourish. It's in their self-interest to flourish, and this has led to businesses across the globe, small and large, embracing positive change as their core strategy. I think the SDGs are the North Star for many of us, including the private sector, and we need to find a system in which we can act easily together towards those goals. Collaboration, conflict of interest is a challenge, but the more collaborators you have, the more likely others that will see the benefits and the more people that will want to join and be part of that. So I'd say, from my experience, we need to co-create to build that trust.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I go to Senator Proaño. Key message for us.
Bueno, una pregunta que quería contestar que se me envió sencillamente a Voucher del Banco Agrícola de Nigeria. Me decía acerca del nivel de representación que tienen las organizaciones en Ecuador. Bueno, en el Ecuador la organización campesina tiene un nivel alto, ¿no? Tiene organizaciones desde lo local, tiene organizaciones en lo regional, tiene organizaciones nacionales, tienen participación política dentro de todo el ámbito del país. Solo como un ejemplo, las leyes que estuve a cargo, la ley de recursos hídricos, la ley de tierras, la ley de semillas, fue hecho con consulta prelegislativa y consultamos a más de cerca de 2.500 a 3.000 organizaciones campesinas. Participaron cerca de entre 8 a 10.000 dirigentes para la legislación. Entonces hay un nivel alto de participación y de organización. Y el otro tema que me decía, si hay las consideraciones de género, pues sí, en el país desde el 92, 93 ha habido mucha influencia y mucho trabajo en el tema género y todas las normas que se realizan y todo el apoyo. Hay una cierta paridad ya a nivel nacional tanto en empleo como en cargos políticos, cargos en este tema. Se ha avanzado, creo que falta, sí, pero hay un nivel interesante de avance sobre esto. Así que para contestar esa pregunta y una que estaba ahí muy clara, decía, sí, creo que se necesita subsidios para los pequeños y medianos, porque no pueden competir con empresas que tienen todo un poder logístico económico y que en los concursos que existen de alimentación nunca pueden ganar.
Fantastic.
Entonces, eso es necesario que tengan un subsidio para poder generar mayor producción local de alimentos y poder abastecer y seguir, no quedarnos en hambre cero, sino quedarnos en desarrollo local campesino, que debería ser nuestro fin. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator. Now I go to Camilla. Camilla, less than 30 seconds. I'm sorry, I can't give you any more than that.
Okay, thanks. So just to close up, I think that the ideal is that we are all aligned after this goal, that is to have a healthy diet and sustainable diet. And all those actors that are aligned with that goal should be sitting at the table. In the case of Chile, that was not the case of big corporates. That was not what they were promoting. And unfortunately, really, the way that we had to move was really by promoting this regulation. And then what we have observed is that increasingly they have been changing the views of this action. I just briefly want to say that Smes were contacted by the government. They were supported during the implementation of the law. They were given more time for adapting to the regulation. And really, I would make a distinction between big corporates and SME.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we go to Francis. Francis, your last word for us. Few words, please, not much time. Okay, Francis. Okay, I'm sure you can write your last words in the chat box for us. But ladies and gentlemen, it's been a very, very interesting discussion. For me, the bottom line is that we have seen several examples. Private sector and government can work together, I mean, to really move the agenda for us to get these healthy diets we are talking about. But we really have to build this trust. You know, if there's no trust, it will be very difficult to move forward. So trust and transparency is very critical. And that's where I would like to end here and hand over to Marcella. Marcella, thank you very much for being patient with us, but it's so interesting, we just couldn't stop. The floor is yours, Marcella.
Thank you very much, Anna, and I agree that it was really fascinating panel. Now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Steve Godfrey from GAIN, who will summarize everything we heard. Steve, the floor is yours.
Well, I can't, because even that chat box is rocking, Marcella. I mean, this has been quite an explosive discussion. I think in terms of the questions we went into, if there's any issue around where the government needs to lead, I think we've answered it. We had 4 brilliant examples from Ecuador, Chile, Turkey, France's own comments on how the government's trying to reshape money for the SMEs. And the first point in the chat box that Boyd made, in a relatively small country like New Zealand, there are 31 government departments and agencies that have something that touches food policy and food systems. So we know if we want to change things, you have to make them a priority. So a plan does seem like it's essential. How you do that has been a big theme of this discussion. And I think you used the words, Marcella, it's a complex balancing act. Yes, conflict of interest is pretty much fundamental. I would say, from my own experience, conflict of interest is the business of government in every sphere. It's not special to food. And what we need to do is make sure we're tough on conflict of interest, but also tough on engaging the real stakeholders. Because the danger of not having all the stakeholders at the table is that your policy doesn't work, doesn't have traction, and isn't based in reality. I thought one of the really interesting things for our overall theme about how to, you know, from yesterday, how do we really bring the small individual actors who are collectively the core, the backbone of the food system, the farmers, the SMEs, the micro-enterprises into the process? I thought the examples of Chile and Ecuador really answered that. It's political. That, you know, those 2 governments have made a point of bringing in all of the key stakeholders in their food system and giving them a voice. And I love the Senator's description of this trilogy where, you know, the government policies focused on education, health, and agriculture as one focus. And I think that's a really good example. I think finally, the piece that really to me came through that was quite innovative in this discussion was the question of data or metrics and how that links to the policy process. Fascinating that in Chile, you know, they're using the evidence to change the attitude of the stakeholders, in particularly the companies, showing that there are opportunities, there aren't the impacts on jobs that were feared, and that the labeling system is a really interesting experiment that's changing food consumption patterns in the food environment. I think where we face bigger problems is we can't really answer the question that Lawrence put just before we launched into this, that, you know, we don't really have a system that can measure the adequacy of the food system against the goals that we've set about healthier diets. It feels like a long way to go. And you know, Carol said from first that, you know, we just don't have the evidence of the trade-offs and the real costs which governments have to manage if they're making policy changes that would affect, if you come back to the first example of New Zealand, 31 departments or agencies and the stakeholders that work with them. So the broader question of how we measure the impact of the changes we want on the food system, not just, as one of the colleagues said in the box, not just on food and diet, but also on the wider objectives of the SDGs. That's something that really is going to become a big priority if the policy processes at the national level are to be made easier for governments to build these healthier diets with the private sector and the other stakeholders. Thanks, Marcella.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I think you put it together in such a compelling way, and that's going to illuminate our next discussions that are going to happen in the breakout sessions. So you will all be moved now into your own breakout rooms. Right now we have 14:24, so we're a little over time. But I suggest that we come back into plenary at 15:10 rather than 15, so that gives you a little bit more of time for discussion, and then we'll hear back from the breakout sessions. And now, so please, you will be going into the moderation by Tito Arunga and Bibi Gioke. So we'll see you at 15:10. Hello, hello, welcome back. Welcome back again to our plenary session and we are really looking forward to listen what went on, the main takeaways in the breakout sessions. So it is my pleasure to give the floor now to Tito Arunga.
Thank you very much, Marcella. We had a fantastic conversation, and sometimes you really wish there's more time to continue with this conversation. But basically, within our group, I mean, we were looking at the whole question around the enabling and innovative policy, national and municipal policies that have facilitated support for SMEs. And we had some examples like from Kenya. In their presentation, you know, they said that their first process was to do a policy effective analysis. And through this analysis, they noticed one of the gaps was the fact that there's no institutionalization of private and public participation in policy. You know, it's very ad hoc, they're called in, but that process is not institutionalized. So they were able to move and get a structure that would enable this to happen. And this was the genesis of ASNET, which is the Agriculture Sector Network in Kenya. And one of the main, that is already done. So there's conversation, very robust conversation going on between private and public sector. The challenge now is really how to ensure that you get these organizations representing smallholder farmers becoming more participative on these platforms. And so becoming more participative and getting stronger and being able to put their demands forward. Then we also had an example from Vietnam to see, as you know, that Vietnam is the first country in Asia to really declare zero hunger. And what has come out is that in Vietnam, they very successfully managed to merge together the agriculture and nutrition policy. They made those policies to work together, and then, you know, moved to the agriculture sensitive nutrition, and focused on malnutrition for poor areas. So they've got very strong policies that support SMEs in remote areas, and, you know, in the whole area of process and supply of nutritious foods to markets in rural areas, there are very strong policies that support that.
2 minutes, please.
Yes, and then on the area of on nutrition information, we talked to Fatima from Uganda, who is a young person in business, and we're looking at some of the challenges that some of the incentives that are enabling them work and how to make more young people move in as entrepreneurs on nutritious foods. And she told us the most critical thing is on nutritious information, markets, and providing the necessary training to young people. And finally, we talked to Claudia, who really gave us the example of, you know, bringing and uniting stakeholders together and looking at, you know, using the power of business to deliver sustainable results. So getting that coalition of platforms. And one of the ways that they managed to deal with the conflict of interest situation, which had even come in the main discussions, is that, you know, really ensuring that the participants focus on the long-term goal. And the long-term goal is what then drives the whole agenda. And then there's something around self-regulation. And what was said that, you know, self-regulation can work if it's coordinated properly by the apex body and involving all actors in the value chain. I think that was basically how our discussions unfolded. Thank you very much, Marcel.
Thank you so much, Tito Nuts. My pleasure to give the floor to Bibi. Tell us.
Thank you very much, Marcella. We had a very animated discussion with the 4 panelists from Oman, Mexico, Nigeria, and with our colleague from Ghana. 5 or 6 things came up in the discussions. First was that I think we need to revolutionize food systems from a research and innovation perspective so that we co-create solutions with all the actors, from government to the public sector, to the private sector, making sure that the SMEs are actually at the center of benefiting from any policy regulation as well as financing to support their businesses. And then the other thing was we need to be able to contextualize research so that the policy that comes out of that and the programming is from a multidisciplinary perspective so that every actor plays their part to benefit the consumer and ensure that the consumer can actually demand the healthier products. And then creating an enabling environment for food quality, safety, and regulation. Looking at the local markets, particularly in the case of Nigeria, where food safety is an issue, regulation of marketing food commodities remains very critical, including ensuring that the food losses are minimized. And then another important point that came out was that of ensuring adequate capacity building with, and maybe with another lens through it, that, you know, the indigenous knowledge systems should be infused in what the farmers are taught, in what the food processors are taught, and what the consumers can then benefit from that. And then the appropriate models of actually creating this capacity building models. And then innovation and technology should always look at the culture, the tradition, like I said, and what, you know, traditionally can be harnessed. Policy transformation in the context of knowledge, in the context of understanding that nutrition is not just about consuming, but nutrition can be indeed good business. And we cannot do this in a vacuum. Eva emphasized the point that educating consumers and improving communications, working with the media to promote healthy diets and to create the demand for healthy diet is not an automatic process. And like I said in my preface, that talking about consumer demand is actually a new phenomenon that we should look at through the lens of a very different interdisciplinary, multifactorial, multisectoral approaches. Then we can be able to arrive at a model that, you know, has various tentacles that benefit the consumer, benefit the SME, benefit government as a whole, and benefit the regions as well as the other actors involved. I'll stop that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. And you did it in even less than the time assigned. So thank you very much to both of you. Now it's my pleasure. We're moving into the closing session for today's discussion. And it's my pleasure to give the floor to Máximo Torero, who is the Chief Economist at FAO, as well as the Assistant Director General for the Economic and Social Development Department. Máximo.
Thank you very much, Marcela, and thank you very much to Lawrence and to all the people working so hard today. For me, it's a pleasure to give a brief closing remarks following the very fruitful discussion. I was not able to follow everything in detail, but I was following the last 2 hours of the discussion. So today's session focused on strengthening national policy, making for healthy diets, and how can business and governments work together. The food system's transformation to healthy diets we are all calling for is a huge task, and no one sector can achieve this by itself, and all the stakeholders need to be together in this process. Now, why is this so important? What we have found in the SOFI report of 2020 is first that we are completely off track in achieving the zero hunger goal, the SDG 2. Second is that we not only have increased undernourishment in 10 million in the last year and in 60 million in the last 5 years, but we have also increased the incapacity of households to be able to access to the nutritious food that they need. And today, healthy diets are 5 times more expensive than energy-based diets. Not only that, 33 billion people, 1/3 of what will be our population in 2030 cannot afford the minimum cost healthy diet. So it's a huge challenge, and it's a challenge that it has to be handled by producers, by processors, by intermediaries. All the producers, smallholders, microenterprises involved in agriculture, all of them are private sector. But the government also plays a role, and the private sector cannot do it itself alone. It has to work together with the government and the different stakeholders to be able to achieve what we need to achieve. So the first thing that I wanted to bring as a closing remark is the importance of creating these enabling policies by governments to be able to achieve the goal and to be able to allow the private sector, which goes from small size to medium to large size, to be able to deliver what they are supposed to deliver. The first element of the enabling environment is on the demand side, and that's information, that's the standards, that's similar to what Chile is doing in terms of the labeling of food and bringing information on food. We need to keep improving. We need to keep putting the information so that consumers can make the proper choice. Of course, there is behavioral change, but the only way we can start to accelerate the behavioral change is by bringing information to be able to do that. The other element of enabling environment is also linked to supply side. We don't think, at least in my own personal view, that supply side means necessarily subsidies. But supply side enabling environment means that the rules of the game are there and are equal no matter the size of the producer, are equal no matter the size of the intermediary or the processor. And that means that we need to have rules and capacity to be able to access, for example, to finance, which right now is essential, especially because of the liquidity constraints that the small farmers are facing because of COVID-19. So we need to facilitate that, and governments need to play a role. And the way they can play a role is trying to find ways in which farmers can be more bancarized, and farmers can have better access to the financial system, and trying to find ways in which information about their risk and the risk scoring is more available. And that will facilitate the process. And today, one clear idea that we are pushing is guarantees. Central banks can give guarantees to support farmers. For the large ones, 25%. For the small ones, the ones that are really facing liquidity constraints and don't have normally access to financial system, they can give guarantees for 100%. Why? Because this will bankarize them, and this will allow that in the future, they will become part of the financial system, which is what they need. But there are many ideas around this that can be put in place. Also, of course, they have to work in facilitating access to the technology. They have to work on simplifying the mechanisms and the regulatory mechanisms so that the new varieties, the new seeds can also be available and accessible to people, and trying to bring the necessary institutional design for regulation so that there is no market power concentration and there is no one company controlling everything. That's the role of the government. That's what they facilitate. And that will allow the private sector to play the role. That will facilitate the process of the private sector to play the role. And in the discussions today, also it has highlighted the contributions of micro SMEs and MSMEs, because they are fast growing. They are part of the whole value chain and the processing part of the value chain. And we need to find ways also, because the goal of a micro enterprise or a MSME is not to stay small all the time. The good ones should continue to grow and should continue to increase, the same as the smallholder farmers. What we need is to find mechanisms through which we can concentrate and increase the quantity we produce, no matter it's done by very small or atomized groups. Why? Because that will assure to bring us standards. And that's also an important thing that we need to put in place here to be able to achieve healthy diets. Healthy diets will require food safety standards. And I didn't hear that too much today, but I think it's a really important topic to start looking on how the government can facilitate the rules and regulations to have food safety standards, but also the markets recognize the food safety standards and farmers are able to comply with those. Because for a farmer to have the correct incentive in place is that the market recognize that investment they do to be able to have a produce which is safe and which complies with the food safety regulations. And that also will make it profitable for them. Many people believe when we say that healthy diets are too costly, they are 5 times more costly than energy-based diets, that what we mean is that we're going to reduce the benefits of the farmers. And that's not necessarily true. Farmers can win in 2 different ways. One, they can win by quantity, because if I increase the market and people are more consuming high-value commodities, they will make more money by quantity. Second, they can win because they can reduce the transaction cost, and that will increase the return to the farmers. And differentiation of products, which is typical of high-value commodities, will allow them to do that. And by increasing their efficiency and reducing losses, which has mentioned a lot, could allow them to reduce that. So I think we don't need to think that this will put farmers in the worst situation because food will be cheaper. On the contrary, the response is both supply and demand. You want to increase the demand, and you want to increase the supply. And that not necessarily will mean a lower price. It could mean, if it means a lower price, if it means a lower price for the consumers, it could mean that farmers will sell more and therefore they will gain by quantity and not by margin. But if farmers are more efficient, it could also mean that the money that at the end ends in the farmer will be higher than what we have today. And technology and e-commerce could help substantially to do that. So again, I look forward to the 3rd day of our meeting tomorrow when we discuss going to scale with healthy diets. And I thank you again for all the interest and the very, very nice discussions that I was able to access today during the meetings. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Maximo. Now it's over to you, Lawrence, Executive Director of GAIN.
Thank you, Marcella, and thank you, Tito and Bibi and Maximo. Great summaries, great interventions. Maximo, I always love hearing you talk about economics and farmers and consumers. It's great. And I completely agree with everything you've said. I want to talk a little bit about the how. We've talked a lot about what is an enabling environment, what are the elements of the enabling environment. I want to talk a little bit about two discussions that came up that I thought were interesting around how. So the title of this symposium is Together Around the Table, everyone around the table. But there are two wrinkles I heard about today. One is about the private sector. Should the private sector really be around the table? Which private sector and which table? And the other one was youth. How do we get youth to this table? So on the private sector issues, I think the first thing to say is, the private sector is, and I think I said it yesterday, big company, big multinationals, medium-sized, small and micro companies. And that's the 4 rows. The 2 columns are food companies and non-food companies. And when we speak about the private sector, each of us, we have one of those 8 boxes in our heads. And I think it's really important to remember there are 8 boxes. There's just not one box. So I think it is problematic when really powerful big multinationals will come to the table. But again, we need to distinguish between, are they coming to the table to make decisions, or are they coming to the table to be heard, to be consulted, to understand the perspective, to understand the opportunities, and to understand the risks? And I think governments, of course, are the deciders. They make the decisions. They are accountable to their electorates most of the time for the decisions they make. But if they make decisions without consulting the key actors in the food system, the key actors who are going to play a big role in getting the price of nutritious and safe food down so that number of 3 billion can be attacked. If you don't engage with those private sector actors, you're very likely to make maybe a choice that you feel very good about, but actually is a really terrible choice for the people that you're trying to support. So I think we need to make a distinction between consultation and decision-making fora, and we need to make distinctions between powerful organizations and maybe less powerful organizations. And we've talked a lot about PPPs, and I always get, I'm a bit nervous about PPPs because these are very contractual partnerships. So on the one hand, it's great that they're governed by rules. That's sort of, they're rules-based, that's good. But as we all know, powerful organizations can interpret the rules in ways that are favorable to them, in ways that less powerful organizations cannot. And because they're contracts, they tend to be out of the public space. So again, I much prefer the term public-private engagement because I think the engagement is more transparent. I think it's more creative, and it has lower barriers to entry. Anyone can engage. People can afford to engage who can't afford to enter into a partnership. So I think we just have to be really careful about engagement, the location of engagement, the nature of those who are engaging, and the contracts or otherwise that govern those engagements. And if we fail to do that, if we fail to engage, I think frankly, it's irresponsible, because if we don't engage, we won't understand the opportunities as well as the risks. So I thought I saw quite a lot of nuance in the debate around this, and I would encourage us to keep being thoughtful about this issue and not be binary about it. Second issue was around youth. And, I think, youth are, we often say youth are the future, but actually youth are the present. They're here, they're making decisions right now. Yes, they are future consumers, but they're also current consumers. Yes, they are future entrepreneurs, but many of them are current entrepreneurs. Yes, they're future voters, but they're also current voters. Yes, they're future parents, but many of them, unfortunately, too many of them are current parents. So, and yes, they're future leaders, but many of them are leaders today. So we need to really bring youth in, and we need to do that in a very deliberate way. And I'm very happy that the UN Food System Summit is making a very deliberate effort to appoint youth leaders to very important positions within the action tracks. I'm really supportive of that because I think youth bring a fresh perspective. They ask the hard questions. Any of you have given a talk to your kids' school classes? No, it's the most terrifying talk to give because you'll get really basic fundamental questions. I'm giving an interview to a youth leader tomorrow morning, a scaling up nutrition youth leader, and I've seen the questions she's asking, and I'm absolutely terrified because I've never had to answer these questions before, but they're really good questions. And I think youth leaders can bring a fresh perspective and a creativity, especially around demand creation and generation, that many of us just don't see and don't get. So those are my two comments to buttress the comments from Maximo and Bibi and Tito. How you bring in the private sector really matters, and how you bring in youth really matters. Thank you, Marcella.
Thank you very much indeed. And this brings to the end our session of today. And as you have already noted, our closing remarks already led us into the topics for tomorrow. So wait to see you, all of you, tomorrow to continue this really fascinating conversation. Thanks to everybody and goodbye.